Hello, everyone. Before we get going into deep dives into After Effects, I would like to walk you through some of the common elements of the After Effects interface that will help you connect it with your knowledge of other workflows within the Adobe ecosystem. The goal here is to basically teach you your way around as you explore. Okay. So, as you know, just like with other programs, the environment is a dynamic environment, which means you can switch it and change it to your liking, and you can even save your own workspaces. So, a lot of the things that you use in other programs like Photoshop or Illustrator can translate directly into this program seamlessly so that you don't have an issue relearning a lot of the workflows that you've already learned in other programs. Now, by default, when you start the program, you're going to get the logo animation at the logo screen, and then you're going to get into this screen, which is your welcome screen, and it's going to allow you to select from different options. Since you have nothing, if you haven't created anything yet, haven't created any projects, you won't see anything down here. But as you save projects, you'll start seeing a listing of projects down here that appear. You also have the ability to create new projects, open existing projects, and you have these options here for team projects. Now, team projects refer to a platform that Adobe offers you to work on the cloud so that you can share your workflow with other editors and other motion graphics people and other people within the ecosystem through something called Dynamic Link. And now when you do that, basically you have the ability to have several people working on the same project and everybody's inputting from their end into the same project. The drawback is that everything lives in the cloud. So if you don't have a fast connection, then basically you're SOL. But it is an extremely useful way of working because you can work with anyone around the world seamlessly, basically, because everything is up in the cloud. You also have access to tutorials. If you have time, do browse through them. They're extremely helpful and get you ahead of the game in some instances, getting you to work a lot less on the mechanics of the program, which is not the interest of the course, as you know. The interest of the course is creating storytelling through motion graphics. So I much rather have you focus your energy on storytelling and being creative than on the mechanical portion of the program. The program is just a tool. So with that said, let's go ahead and click here on the new project. And when you click on new project, basically you land on this screen, and most likely from here on out, this will be the screen that you guys see on the videos, which is basically I'm starting from scratch. Now you can set your workspace to anything you want. You have workspaces here that work depending on where you're coming from into this program. So if you are an animator, you can choose animation, and this would make all of the tools available to you that are available for animators readily available to you on the interface. If you choose, say, for example, effects is going to change slightly. If you choose motion tracking, is going to change slightly. So for our class, we're going to be working on the standard setup. That's what we're going to be working on. You might not see paragraph and character in yours. So let me go ahead and close those panels so that you can see how you can add them into the interface. This should be how you see your Essentials interface. When you go under Window, and if I open Character, it will open up. Most likely for you, it will open down here. But just like with any other program in the Adobe environment, you can click on the tab and drag it around to place it elsewhere in the interface. So say, for example, I want to add it to this window here, that's where it lands. But if I want to bring it back down to where it was, I'll place it there by itself, and then it'll take that space. Now, if I want to, and obviously it pushes things around. So if I want to go ahead and add paragraph again to that one, I'll just go into the drop down called paragraph, and I can drag it onto character. And now both of those live within the same window. So it's extremely flexible. You know this from other programs. Now, this is the interface itself. And in the interface, things that are new to you that you haven't seen in other programs include what we call the project window. The project window, for those of you who come from a digital editing or video editing background, would be your bins. That's where you keep all your bins for your video, audio, all the files that you import into your project. Now, it's good to point out at this point that bringing in files into a project doesn't mean that the files are copied into the project. When you import something, you simply create a connection, a link to the file elsewhere in your computer. The reason why I'm making this a point is because when you save a project and simply save the project, you do not save all the files along with it. It only saves the actual After Effects project. There are only a few items that you can create within After Effects that live inside After Effects, that live inside the project. But when you import a file, it does not live within the project. So if I were to ask you to send me a project, I would also need the files that you have been working with. So make sure that you get organized and collect things appropriately within your computer. To that point, we need to make sure that we work, if you're taking this After Effects path in your work life, if you want to do this professionally, or if you want to add it as a tool within your workflow, my advice is that you get a separate hard drive, a separate physical hard drive to save your files, because After Effects does a lot of fragmenting of your drives, and what that does for you is it can make your OS drive either work slower or actually fail at some point. So you might want to make sure that you avoid that by connecting your After Effects to a separate physical drive. And in my case, for example, if I go to Edit, Preferences, and if I go to Media and Video, this cache, you'll notice that I have everything set up to pointing to a D drive in my case. I'm working off a PC, so I have everything pointing to a completely separate drive. If I were to choose another drive, I could just go in here and say, this is my OS drive. I don't want to touch that, but I can choose any of these other drives that I have that are physically separate from my OS drive. In this case, the Data D drive is my fast drive, so I want to keep it on there, and that would be the drive. Then I would select a folder in there, and that would be the folder that creates my backup and my, not backup, sorry, that it saves all of my autosaves, and that keeps all of the media separate from my OS drive to avoid fragmentation. Now we're going to talk about that a little bit more in class. So I'll answer questions about that in class, but know that you should have a separate physical drive to work with these things. It's my advice. Now, for whatever we're going to be doing in class this semester, you don't have to worry. We're not going to work in gigantic projects. So working on the OS drive for this semester should be okay. Okay, so you don't have to rush out to buy a new hard drive. You can work with what you've got. Now, what I do advise is that you download the latest version of the program. You want to have the most recent version of the program, which at this point is, I believe, 2020. So let's go ahead and continue. So project window is where anything that I import would appear. So if I import a Photoshop file, a PNG, a GIF file, a sound file, a graphic, all of these file formats will appear listed over here. And that is just imported into the project. That is just source material. Now, when you want to create something that you want to start manipulating via motion graphics, be it to change all the properties of that object, then you need to put that source file, that source material, into a composition. Now, composition is basically your canvas. It's the construct. It's the area where you're going to place items that we will see in the final output coming out of this project. So whenever you render something, you will be rendering either a static image or a video or an animation or a GIF, an animated GIF, something like that. You will be outputting, you will be rendering to that particular file format. Those items that you render, those items that you actually see as the final product is your composition. That window that you see would be your composition. So now to create a composition, you can either create a new composition or you can create a composition from imported footage. If you have footage that you have imported, you can create a composition or import a piece of footage that will determine the dimensions and the properties of that composition. What are those properties? Let's talk about that for just a second. So in order to see what compositions do, let's go ahead and create one. You'll notice that a window opens up and it asks several questions regarding what do you want to call this composition, how big do you want it to be, what frame rate, and all these things. So the presets give you a base value for how you want to start. However, they're not set in stone. That means you can change them to your liking. You can change them to whatever you want. So for our intents and purposes in this class, we could work with, let's say, HDTV. So now what are these options and why are they separated? The top options here are what we used to use when we work with analog video. So these are the formats that are used in broadcast. NTSC for anything that has been, that we call American television. So anywhere in the world that works with our video format, it's called NTSC format. Anything that is based on English television is called PAL, and that's phase alternating line, which is basically comes from the analog way of doing of video production. And I'll talk. I probably have talked to you about that in class already. So that's for these are the let's say grandfather versions of digital television or video formats that we used to use in the past. Since the introduction of HD video and digital video, we have all these other options that have become available to us. And they follow the same format because we still use broadcast, but we're changing more towards a more of a standard format across the board, where you see things going into HD TV, which is what we know, 1920 by 1080 pixels, or UHD, which is 4K, or UHD 8K, which is what people are starting to produce right now. You also have options for outputting to film, directly onto film, and those are these ones down here. For what we're going to be doing in class, we most likely will be working in this realm here, or HD TV 1080. Those are the options that we're going to probably be working on in this class. So let's go ahead and choose this one, HD TV 1080 at 29.97. Now, what does that 29.97 mean? That's the frame rate. Frame rate is the speed of playback. Once again, frame rate is the speed of playback. And that means is how fast your video is playing back as you watch it. Now, it is 29.97 frames per second, which is a weird number. And that is due to the fact that we have to match a specific frequency in the past through which we actually sent radio waves through space. And so in order to do that, they calculated that the best number was that value. Because we're working digital right now, today we would probably work at 30 FPS straight on, just like that. Now, the difference between those two is there's a conversion value. So if you're working with a client, the best thing you can do is ask them, what is the final output for this? If the words broadcast come into the conversation, you're going to be either working at 29.97, 25, or 23.976. Those are the options for broadcast. If they say, "Oh, I'm just gonna put it on my server and we're gonna, put it out on the internet," or it's gonna be shown in digital devices, let's say digital TVs, or it's on a local area network or something like that, then you can start talking about 30, 24, 25, and so on. Anything below 15 frames per second is going to look choppy. So I wouldn't venture into that area unless it's absolutely necessary. So this realm right here is for what we would talk when we talk about animated GIFs or things like that, when we need very few frames. But anything that is video bound, which is what we're doing in class, will be anywhere above 23 or 24 FPS drop frame, what we would call, and above. Okay, so that is the speed of playback. Frame rate is the speed of playback. You can choose also the shape of your pixels. So if you're going to be talking about, depending on the file format that you're working on, you can choose the aspect ratio of your pixels. Now in video, all pixels are not square. So you have elongated pixels that have a different aspect ratio. This is also a question you would ask your client. What aspect ratio do you need this to be? And they will tell you right away. If they don't know and you don't know, then choose square pixels. It is easier to go from square pixels to any of these than the other way around. So I would choose by default square pixels on any project that I work on unless they tell me different. Right here we have the values that affect the composition, the way we view the composition. Resolution refers to the quality of the video that we're seeing on playback as we are building, as we are constructing. If you have plenty of RAM, keep it at full. If you don't know how much RAM you have or you don't know how your computer is going to react, then you can lower that quality. Now, that doesn't change the quality of your final product. Before you go to render, you're going to change the quality back to full. So don't worry about it. This is only for the time that while you're working on your actual file, when you're actually building something. So that's where you would choose the type of resolution that you're going to be working on as you're working. When you go render, you always have the option to go back to full. And actually, this is something that you can change fairly easily within the environment. Once we open up the composition, you'll see in just a second. The time code refers to these are the addresses of every frame. Every frame in your video has an address, basically a number by which it is identified. So in this case, since we're working with 30 FPS, we are working not on film or anything like that. We're measuring time by hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. Since we're working at a time base of 30 FPS, frame rate of 30 FPS, every 30 frames we add 1 second. So this will count from 0 to 29, and then this will turn into 1, then again 0, 0. This resets. It'll go again 0 to 29, and this will turn to 2, and so on and so forth. Then from here on out, it'll be seconds, minutes, and hours. You can tell the composition to be however long you want through the duration of the composition. All of these values are malleable. All of them can be changed. However, piece of advice, you should know what your frame rate is before you actually go and output something, or before you actually start a composition. The reason for that is because based on the frame rate, the keyframes will be placed within your timeline. So if eventually you go change your frame rate, very likely your keyframes, meaning the points in time where something happens, will be moved around in your timeline. And so you want to make sure that that doesn't happen, because it forces you to go back and recheck every single keyframe, which is something that no one wants to do. So you want to make sure that you ask, what is my final frame rate, before you actually commit to creating the composition. I'm going to leave my duration to 10 seconds. And this is a background color, which allows you to, if you click on that swatch, it allows you to pick a color for the background. Now, background by default will be exported as transparent. So if you want a background color to be set, you need to remember, this is all while you're working on the composition. If you want a background color, you need to put a background item in the background. I would advise you also to get organized in the way you use nomenclature. Meaning, make sure that every composition has a proper name, a name that identifies it. So in this case, I'm going to call this intro for now. And the reason for that is because you're easily going to create more than 20, 30 comps in any project. So if you do that, imagine trying to figure out which one's comps 5 or which one's comp 3, or what does that contain. It is a lot easier to use nomenclature that makes sense to you and any other possible people working on this file. So you want to make sure that you use naming conventions that make sense. So in this case, we'll call it intro, and we'll click OK. Now, when I click OK, my window becomes alive. All of the windows become alive. The main thing here is my composition window, you identify by its label up here. And that composition window is my construct. Like I said before, it's the canvas, is where whatever I'm building will be saved or will be placed. Whatever I see when I render will be inside that black box. So anything that I do that is live will be here. If I place items outside over here on the pasteboard, I will not see them in my final render. This down here is your timeline, and this timeline is married or connected or linked to that particular composition window. So this is the composition window, this is its timeline, and you'll notice that they both share the same label, intro, intro. You will also notice that the composition that I created appears now in my project window, which means I do have the ability not only to have any files that I import or any files that I referenced from my computer, Photoshop files, PNGs, audio, and all that jazz, over here, but I also have any composition window that I create. So you'll notice that now this has created that file. Imagine, if you will, I can fit about 15 items here, and most likely you'll have more than 15 items in any given project. So this real estate is at a premium here in this project. So what we want to do is we want to get organized here as well, and that's what these little icons allow you to do. So if I create on the folder, I am allowed to create let's say a folder that I'm going to call comps, and that's going to contain all my comps, and then I can just go ahead and drag my composition into that. Now you'll notice that nothing changed in my interface other than I got more organized. So if I now create a new composition, let's say I create a new one, and I just press Control-N on the keyboard to create a new composition, you can also go composition, new composition, and I'm going to name this one outro. And this outro composition is going to retain the same settings of what I just created a second ago. The settings, by the way, are sticky, meaning whatever I created last will be whatever I open next time. And these are the settings that I had just set. And I simply click OK. I have my new composition outro here. So if I drag it in there, now I'm getting organized. Now I know anytime that I need compositions, I'll go to my compositions folder and I'll find by the name the composition that I'm looking for. Now this timelines basically is where you place all of the items that will become layers in your composition. So any item, any file, any image, any graphic, any sound file that you want, any video that you want to be part of your composition will be placed in here. You can either drag it from your project window onto your composition window or from your project window onto your timeline down here for that specific composition. And then you can start changing the properties of that specific item, which is what we will see in our next video. So with that said, know that basically this is your timeline, and the timeline, like I said, each timeline is connected to its composition window. So right now I am looking at the outro composition. If I click on intro, notice that my composition label changes to intro. So that would be a first place to look when things don't look, they appear not to be responding. The first place you should look at is your labels up here and down here and make sure that they match. If they don't match, look for the actual thing, for the actual label on any of the tabs that start appearing here. The reason why I'm saying that is because sometimes you can actually open up other tabs here, such as source window, or you can open up a layer window, and they all appear up, up here as tabs. And so you might be here on your timeline for the outro composition, but up here you might be under a layer window. And so you need to make sure that you dig yourself out of that layer all the way to the outro composition so that the two things match. Over here on the right hand side, you have things that are common to all programs, basically things that we know from graphic design or Photoshop or Illustrator, such as character, paragraph, information, and all that jazz. Things that you don't know include the effects and presets, which is where all of our effects for this program reside. All of the things that we can do that are effects, kind of the same effects or same style of effects that you see in Photoshop. Whoops, I didn't mean to double click on that. Appear in that window. So that's part of the reason why we call this program After Effects is, for us, is what we call Photoshop in steroids, because it's basically everything that you can do in Photoshop, but it explodes. You have the ability to create basically anything that you imagine that Photoshop file to do, but in motion, which is incredible. So I am really looking forward to seeing what you guys can do with these with this platform, and bring in your storytelling capabilities, bring in all of the good stuff that you've learned, all of those very creative works of art that you've created in Photoshop and Illustrator that I've seen from you guys, and inject life into them. So I am really looking forward to seeing those projects come alive.